Memphis, early 1970s. The night hums with restless energy. Thousands of fans gather at the arena, their voices rising like a tidal wave, waiting for Elvis Presley to step into the spotlight. But just blocks away, in the narrow alley behind his hotel, a very different scene unfolds. Rushing through the back exit to avoid the crowd, Elvis doesn't notice the small leather wallet slip from his pocket. To anyone else, it's just worn leather, but inside are fragments of his soul. Faded photographs, notes he's carried for years, and a fragile letter from his mother. The one thing he swore never to lose. Minutes later, in the shadows of a deserted street, a girl stoops to pick it up. 17 at most, hungry, exhausted, wrapped in an oversized men's shirt, she's learned to survive on scraps and silence. The wallet could mean food, shelter, escape. Yet, as she opens it under the dim glow of a broken street lamp, what she finds inside will force her into a choice far heavier than hunger. Two worlds, the glittering stage and the forgotten street, are about to collide, bound by something as ordinary as lost leather and as extraordinary as the truths it carries. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The rehearsal hall smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and varnished wood, a mix that clung to every stage in Memphis that summer. Musicians tuned guitars, brass players polished valves, and the steady thump of drums tested the patience of sound engineers. Amid the noise, Elvis Presley entered quietly, sunglasses low on his nose, collar turned up as if to shield himself from a draft only he could feel. To the others in the room, he looked calm, maybe tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. Only he knew something wasn't right. He slid a hand into the inside pocket of his jacket, the gesture so automatic he barely thought about it, until he felt nothing there. A moment's pause, then a sharper search. The other pocket, the trousers, even the coat left hanging over a chair. Nothing. His pulse picked up. The wallet was gone. For any man, losing a wallet meant inconvenience. Money, cards, maybe a license. For Elvis, it was far more than that. The cash didn't matter. He had enough of it in bank vaults and hotel safes. What he had carried inside that leather fold was a private universe of memory. A faded photograph of his mother smiling on the porch in Tupelo, her arm around him in his boyhood years, a small church bulletin from the Pentecostal service she once insisted they attend together, and above all, a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age, her handwriting, steady and neat, telling him to keep faith, to remember where he came from. She had given it to him shortly before he shipped out with the army in 1958. It was the last letter she ever wrote. Now it was gone, as though a door had slammed shut on the part of him that kept her close. Elvis felt his chest tighten. He told no one. His bandmates, men who had been with him since the beginning, would not understand why a grown man clung to an old scrap of paper like a child to a toy. They might not say it out loud, but he feared the look, the quiet judgment that would follow. So he tucked the anxiety deep inside, masking it beneath a forced smile and a few jokes that fell flatter than usual. When a microphone squealed with feedback, he snapped at the technician with an edge harsher than the problem warranted. Heads turned, puzzled. He was rarely short-tempered with crew, but no one dared ask. Somewhere across town, the lost wallet had already found a pair of hands. In the damp basement of an abandoned house, a girl no older than 16 sat with her knees drawn tight against her chest. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, the floor scattered with bottles and old newspapers. A single candle flickered on a broken crate, casting shadows that seemed to breathe with her. She wore a jacket several sizes too big, sleeves rolled up past the wrists, and shoes with soles half detached. Hunger had thinned her face, but her eyes remained sharp, alert to every sound from the street above. She opened the wallet as if it were a treasure chest. Dollar bills, enough to eat for weeks if she stretched them carefully. She held them to her nose, smelling the faint cologne of the man who had once carried them. Her first thought was simple survival. Take the cash, discard the rest. But as she searched further, she noticed the folded sheet tucked behind the photograph. Curious, she smoothed it open. The handwriting was elegant yet maternal, firm but tender. My son, wherever you go, remember you're never alone. God walks with you, she stopped. The words pierced through her defenses, through the layers of cynicism she had built after too many nights on the streets. She read it again, lips moving silently, and something in her chest stirred, a sensation she had nearly forgotten existed. Conscience. The idea of keeping the wallet suddenly felt heavy. The money could feed her, yes, but this letter belonged to someone who had loved and been loved. She could feel it in every curve of the pen strokes. Her own mother had vanished years ago, leaving behind nothing but a memory blurred by time. The letter made her think of that loss, of how it felt to be abandoned without explanation. If someone had stolen her last memory, how would she endure? Her stomach growled, cruelly reminding her of the hunger gnawing at her insides. She clenched the money in one hand, the letter in the other. Two futures lay before her, one with food in her belly, shoes on her feet, maybe a temporary reprieve from the cold nights. The other, a road of uncertainty, risking everything to return something precious to a stranger she might never even reach. The struggle twisted her features. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sentiment alone, but from the brutality of choice itself. Back in the rehearsal hall, Elvis tried to sing. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, cracked on the high notes. He shook his head, irritated at himself. To the band he muttered something about being tired, but inside, the emptiness of that missing letter echoed louder than any guitar. He remembered the day of his mother's funeral, the casket lowered under the Mississippi sun, his hand gripping that letter as though it could bring her back. He had sworn never to part with it. Now it was gone, and with it, a piece of his anchor in a world that often spun too fast. He excused himself earlier than usual, ignoring the questions from Jerry Schilling and the others. "Just need some air," he said. The truth was simpler and sadder. He needed to be alone with the absence. Across town, the girl folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the wallet. She blew out the candle, plunged into darkness, and pressed the wallet against her chest. For the first time in months, she prayed, not for herself, but for guidance. The city outside carried on, neon lights buzzing over Beale Street, cars rumbling past diners where jukeboxes spilled music into the night. Two lives, a world apart, one wrapped in fame and wealth, the other in hunger and shadows, had been tethered by a lost wallet and a fragile piece of paper. Neither knew yet how deeply their paths were about to intertwine. The cafe was half empty, its air thick with the smell of fried eggs, burnt coffee, and cigarette smoke that had seeped into the wallpaper over years. The girl slipped inside, clutching the wallet tightly against her ribs beneath her oversized jacket. She kept her head low, afraid that someone might recognize what she carried, or worse, take it from her. A waitress with tired eyes and a pencil-thin figure glanced at her but said nothing. She had seen too many like her to care. The girl slid into the back booth where the shadows stretched long. Her stomach ached, twisting itself into knots, but she ordered nothing. She simply sat, staring at the cracked Formica tabletop, trying to summon the courage to make a decision. Run with the money and eat tonight? Or do something that terrified her more than hunger? Return it? A clunky black-and-white television sat on a high shelf near the counter, the kind with antennae wrapped in tin foil. It buzzed with static before a news anchor's voice broke through. Elvis Presley is set to perform at the Mid-South Coliseum this weekend? She raised her head. On the screen appeared a familiar face, the same one she had seen in the photograph inside the wallet. Hair slicked back, eyes piercing even through the blurred signal, smile that seemed too large for the tiny screen. She felt a shock ripple through her. This wasn't just the wallet of some wealthy man in a Cadillac. She was holding something that belonged to Elvis Presley. Her heart pounded. She whispered his name to herself, barely audible. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. But she had never been near his world, never thought their lives could even glance against each other. And yet, here she was, his most private possession tucked under her arm in a corner cafe. The thought of returning it suddenly became heavier. Who would believe her? A homeless girl with dirty shoes claiming she had found Elvis Presley's wallet. More likely, they would call her a thief, maybe even hand her to the police. And yet, the letter inside gnawed at her conscience. She couldn't erase the words of his mother from her mind. Outside, the city pulsed with excitement. News of Elvis's show had drawn fans to Memphis like moths to a flame. Girls in bright skirts waited outside his hotel with scrapbooks and photographs. Men lingered with records, hoping for an autograph. The sidewalks were crowded, buzzing with a feverish energy that made the city seem alive, even after midnight. The girl decided to try. She walked to the hotel where Elvis was staying, the Peabody, its grand lobby glowing with chandeliers and marble floors. She never dared step inside, but she lingered by the side entrance, where a group of bodyguards stood, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. Fans screamed whenever a limousine pulled up, desperate just to glimpse the man himself. The girl waited for a break in the chaos and approached, clutching the wallet in both hands. "Excuse me," she began, her voice shaking. "I need to give this to Mr. Presley. It belongs to him." The nearest guard glanced at her, his expression already hardened. "Back up, honey. No autographs tonight." "It's not that. I found this. It's his—" She tried to explain, but another guard stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, not gently. "Move along. We've heard every trick in the book. You think you're the first one trying to sneak something in?" His tone dripped with disdain. She tried again, more desperate. "Please, I'm telling the truth." "Just let me give it to him." Just once, laughter broke out among a few of the men. One pushed her lightly back toward the street. "Sweetheart, the king doesn't have time for beggars." The words sliced through her like glass. She staggered, cheeks burning, as the crowd of fans turned to watch. Some giggled, thinking she was another obsessive girl who had been put in her place. Others ignored her completely. Humiliation washed over her, heavier than hunger, heavier than fear. She wanted to scream, to throw the wallet at their feet, to prove them wrong. Instead, she clutched it tighter and stumbled away into the dark. Back inside the hotel, Elvis sat alone in his suite. He had tried to rehearse earlier, but his voice had betrayed him again, cracking and faltering. His friends noticed, whispering to one another when they thought he wasn't listening. Jerry Schilling, loyal as ever, asked him softly, "You all right, Elvis? You seem off." Elvis waved the concern away, mumbling about exhaustion, but the truth pressed down on him with a weight he could not shake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother's face, her words inked on that paper. The loss hollowed him in a way he couldn't articulate. not even to his closest circle. Fame, fortune, all of it suddenly felt fragile without that anchor. As he sat, restless and distracted, the sound of the crowd outside his hotel filtered in. Screams, chants, the endless cycle of adoration. Yet none of it reached him. He felt detached, as if the cheers were for someone else entirely, a version of himself he could no longer touch. Meanwhile, the girl walked back through the neon streets, her humiliation raw. She had been treated as invisible all her life, but tonight was worse. It wasn't invisibility, it was contempt. She decided then. She would not hand the wallet to the men who mocked her. If Elvis was to receive it, it would be from her directly. No middlemen, no bodyguards. The decision gave her a flicker of resolve. For the first time in months, she felt purpose. Not survival, not hiding, but something resembling dignity. She would find a way. The night pressed on. Two souls moved separately through the city. One in a gilded hotel room, drowning in the weight of memory. The other in the shadows, clutching the fragile bridge that connected their worlds. Neither knew how close they already were, nor how costly the meeting would become. The Mid-South Coliseum pulsed like a living organism that night. From the parking lots stretching into the distance came the low rumble of anticipation. Horns honking, voices shouting, vendors calling out with popcorn and soda. Inside, the arena was a storm of sound. Tens of thousands of fans pressed into seats, some clutching banners, others cameras, all straining for the moment when the lights would dim. Backstage, Elvis stood in his dressing room, the gold of his belt buckle catching the glow of the mirrors, his jumpsuit already heavy on his shoulders. The room was noisy with handlers and friends, but to him it all sounded distant. His thoughts drifted back again to the missing wallet. No matter how he tried to push it aside, the emptiness gnawed. He adjusted his collar, staring at his own reflection, and wondered if the audience would see through him tonight. Meanwhile, outside the arena, the girl studied the guarded entrances with the sharpness of someone who had spent years navigating streets and closed doors. She had no ticket, no invitation, nothing but stubborn will. She waited until a cluster of workers carrying cables slipped in through a service gate, then followed close, head down, moving as if she belonged. One man glanced at her, an older stagehand with kind eyes, and though he said nothing, he didn't stop her. Perhaps he saw the desperation in her posture. She found herself in a labyrinth of corridors, humming with equipment. The floor shook faintly under her feet, with the bass of the opening act. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the wallet inside her jacket, trying not to be noticed. The smell here was different than the streets. Electric wires, sweat, hairspray, and fried food wafting in from concessions. For the first time, she felt the world of performance not as a dream, but as a machine in motion. When the house lights dimmed, a roar erupted so loud it seemed the concrete itself trembled. Elvis walked toward the stage, bodyguards forming a wall around him, flashbulbs igniting even from behind the curtain. The girl, standing in the shadows, caught her first real glimpse of him. On stage, he transformed. The hesitation of rehearsal vanished, his body moving with effortless rhythm, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The audience screamed, cried, reached for him, their faces shining with devotion. To her eyes, he looked almost mythical. Sequins, catching the spotlight, every gesture commanding, every note striking the air like fire. She had never felt so small. In the roar of that crowd, in the magnitude of his presence, her own life, cold nights, hunger, isolation, felt microscopic. Yet the wallet against her ribs reminded her that behind the spectacle was a man who had once been a son, who still carried the memory of a mother's words. she held the proof of that humanity in her hands. For 2 hours, she lingered near the backstage door, listening to the concert unfold. She heard the stomping of feet, the fevered applause, the high-pitched shrieks when he slowed into a ballad. At one point, she closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. For a moment, her stomach, her shame, her fear, all of it disappeared. When the final encore ended and the sound faded into echoes, she braced herself. The corridors behind the stage exploded with movement, crew packing up instruments, reporters clamoring for access, fans trying to slip past guards. The girl pressed forward, weaving through the bodies. Twice she was shoved aside, once nearly knocked over by a rushing cameraman. But she refused to stop. Then, at the far end of the hallway, she saw him. Elvis emerged from the stage, sweat darkening his collar, his hair damp, but his presence undiminished. He carried himself with quiet dignity, nodding politely to those who congratulated him, though his eyes seemed elsewhere. To the girl, the sight was almost unbearable. The man on stage had been a legend, untouchable. Here, walking toward her, he looked human, tired, older than the posters made him appear, yet infinitely more real. Her legs trembled. This was her chance. She stepped forward, but instantly one of the guards spotted her and barked, "Back up!" The girl's heart pounded. She knew if she hesitated, they would drag her away again. Summoning every ounce of courage, she pulled the wallet from her jacket and held it out, her voice breaking. "It's his. Please, let me give it to him." The movement caught Elvis's eye. He stopped. For a second, the chaos around them seemed to pause. His gaze fell on the worn leather in her hand, and recognition flickered instantly. The guard reached to shove her aside, but Elvis lifted his hand. A small gesture, yet it froze everyone in place. Silence settled, thick and strange, in the middle of the corridor bustle. Slowly, he stepped toward her. The girl's fingers shook as she extended the wallet. She could hardly breathe. He took it, carefully, almost reverently, and opened it right there in front of her. The moment his eyes landed on the folded letter inside, something changed in his face. Not joy, not relief, but a sudden stillness, like a man who had seen a ghost. His thumb brushed over the faded paper, and the world seemed to vanish for him. The laughter of the crew, the chatter of journalists, the hum of the arena, all melted away. Only the girl remained, standing before him with trembling hands, and the memory of his mother, vivid and unbearable, staring back at him from that fragile page. The corridor, so noisy moments before, felt suspended in time. For everyone watching, it was a confusing interruption. But for Elvis, and for the girl, it was the instant when two entirely separate lives collided, and nothing would ever be the same again. The corridor behind the stage still buzzed from the aftershocks of the concert. Musicians carried cases, reporters barked questions, crew members dragged cables across the floor. Yet in the center of it all stood a moment of silence that seemed unbreakable. Elvis held the wallet in both hands, his thumb resting on the letter folded inside. His breathing slowed, his expression unreadable. The girl lowered her eyes. For a second, she wondered if she had done something foolish, if the guards would still yank her away. She half expected a rough hand on her shoulder. Instead, she heard his voice, quiet, measured, so different from the thunderous tone that had filled the arena only minutes ago. "Where did you find this?" The words hung heavy, not as an accusation, but as a plea for understanding. She tried to answer, stumbling over her own tongue. I found it near Beale Street. I wasn't trying to steal. I swear. Her voice cracked, the shame rising in her throat. The guards bristled. One of them stepped forward, irritation plain. "She shouldn't be here. Let's take her out before this gets messy." But Elvis lifted his hand again, firmer this time. His eyes never left the girl's face. "No, she stays." The men hesitated, unused to such direct defiance. The air grew taut, a standoff of wills. Managers shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. The fear in their voices wasn't about the wallet or the girl. It was about appearances, headlines, the ravenous press waiting just beyond those doors. "Elvis, this isn't wise," one muttered. "People will talk." "They'll twist it." Elvis turned his head slightly, his jaw tightening. "They always do," he said, the steel in his tone shutting down further protest. The girl fidgeted with her sleeves, eyes darting to the exits, her instinct telling her to run. But something in his gaze held her still. He didn't look at her like the guards had, as a nuisance or a liar. He looked as though he were searching for something familiar in a stranger. Then he noticed her jacket. It was torn at the elbows, but the fabric was unmistakable. Workwear from the 1950s, the kind worn by laborers in small southern towns. The color and cut jolted a memory loose. His father's friends back in Tupelo, men with dirt under their nails and sweat-stained collars, men who carried the same kind of fabric to the cotton fields and back. For a fleeting moment, standing in front of this girl, he wasn't in Memphis, wasn't in a Coliseum corridor surrounded by fame and handlers. He was a barefoot boy again on the red dirt roads of Mississippi. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "What's your name?" She hesitated. It had been so long since anyone asked her that question without scorn. She answered softly, almost like she was reminding herself. He repeated it, letting the syllables settle in the room. Around them, unease thickened. One of the managers pressed forward, voice sharp. "Elvis, let us handle this. The press will eat you alive if they hear you were cornered backstage by a street kid." The words landed like an insult, not just to her, but to him. Elvis straightened, his shoulders squaring. "Cornered?" he repeated slowly, each consonant deliberate. Then, turning to the men, he said with finality, "Nobody touches her." Nobody. The command silenced them. Even the guards shifted back, their authority suddenly diminished. The girl blinked, astonished. She had expected suspicion, dismissal, maybe even arrest. Instead, he had protected her. Elvis looked down again at the wallet, opening it as though to confirm it was truly his. His fingers lingered on the photograph of his mother. He felt the old wound tear open, the loss he never fully healed. He wanted to ask how long she had kept it, what had drawn her to return it, but the tremor in her hands told him enough. She had fought with herself to be here, and courage had carried her to this hallway. He closed the wallet carefully, like a priest folding away a sacred relic, and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you," he said simply. The words were almost inaudible under the clamor of the corridor, but to her they sounded like absolution. Still, tension lingered. Reporters were gathering just beyond the doors, shouting his name. If they stormed through now, they would see a star holding court with a homeless girl, and the story would spiral out of his control. Yet Elvis didn't move to hide it. For the first time that night, he felt oddly calm, as though the noise around him no longer mattered. The girl shifted, uncertain. "I should go," she whispered. He shook his head, his voice low but unwavering. "Not yet." And with that, the current of the evening shifted. The machinery of fame, guards, managers, expectations had pressed down on him all night. But in this instant, Elvis Presley chose not the role of the king, but the role of a man who recognized a reflection of his own past, standing before him in torn clothes. The crowd outside chanted his name, hungry for an appearance. But in this hidden corridor, what mattered was not the roar of thousands. It was the quiet truth no one else wanted to see. The limousine rolled away from the Colosseum under the cloak of night. Neon lights flickered across its tinted windows, reflecting fleeting shapes of diners, pawn shops, and liquor stores. Inside, silence filled the space. Elvis sat at one end, shoulders heavy, the girl opposite him, folded into the corner of the seat as though bracing for impact. The plush leather seemed almost hostile to her, its richness too foreign against her worn clothes. Outside, fans pressed against barricades, screaming his name, pounding on the car as it passed. Elvis gave them a faint wave through the glass, but his mind was elsewhere. When the car turned onto a quieter avenue, he leaned back, watching the girl in the dim light. She kept her gaze fixed on her knees, afraid to meet his eyes. At the hotel, security swarmed as usual, but Elvis gave a curt nod, signaling that no one was to interfere. He led her through the grand lobby quickly, ignoring the whispers of late-night guests who paused at the sight of the king moving with a ragged stranger at his side. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, and marble gleamed underfoot, but the girl seemed smaller with every step, shrinking inside the luxury that only highlighted her poverty. In his suite, Elvis dismissed everyone, managers, friends, bodyguards, until the door shut and silence descended. The space was vast. Thick carpets muffled their steps, lamps glowed with soft amber, curtains framed the skyline of Memphis. For her, it was another world entirely, almost unbearable in its brightness. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed, too nervous to sit. Elvis removed his jacket, tossing it over a chair, then gestured gently. "You can sit down. No harm will come to you here." She hesitated, then perched on the edge of a sofa, posture stiff. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to her. She accepted it with both hands, as though it were something precious. For a long time, neither spoke. The weight of the wallet, safely in his pocket again, filled the silence. Finally, Elvis leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Tell me," he said, voice quiet but insistent. "How did you come to have it?" Her words spilled slowly, halting at first, then flowing with the release of long-held burdens. She spoke of nights spent under bridges, of a father lost to whiskey, of a mother who vanished when she was a child. She described slipping into abandoned houses for shelter, digging through trash for food, and the unrelenting ache of being forgotten. She told him how she had found the wallet, how hunger had almost driven her to take the money, and how the letter had stopped her cold. Elvis listened without interruption. His gaze never wavered, though his chest tightened with each detail. Her story was not foreign to him. It echoed parts of his own youth. He remembered nights in Tupelo when supper was nothing but beans, when his parents feared eviction, when his mother clutched him close, as though her embrace could shield him from poverty itself. When she finished, she lowered her head. "That letter, I couldn't keep it. I knew it belonged to someone who loved their mother, like I once loved mine. That's why I came." Elvis sat back, drawing a deep breath. He reached into his pocket, withdrew the wallet, and opened it once more. Carefully, he removed the folded sheet, its edges frayed with time. He held it up between them. "This," he said softly, "is the last thing she ever wrote to me. She passed while I was overseas. I never got to say goodbye." His voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. "I've carried it with me ever since. When I thought I might lose it—" He stopped, shaking his head. The sentence was too painful to finish. The girl's eyes glistened. For the first time, she saw not the performer from the television, not the untouchable figure on stage, but a son grieving for his mother decades later. They sat in silence again, but this time it was not uncomfortable. It was heavy, yes, but shared. Two different lives bound by loss. The glow of a single lamp softened the room, leaving the rest in shadow. The city outside still roared with life, but in that suite, time seemed suspended. The girl finally whispered, "I thought I was alone in the world." Elvis looked at her, his expression gentle but firm. "So did I, once. And maybe we both still are. But tonight, we're not." Neither moved for a while. The sound of the air conditioner hummed low, the only reminder that the world still turned beyond those walls. Two solitudes sat together, one wrapped in velvet, the other in rags, discovering in silence that their loneliness was not entirely their own. Morning sunlight leaked through the heavy curtains of the suite, casting pale streaks across the carpet. Elvis had not slept much. He sat in an armchair near the window, still in last night's clothes, staring at the city below as it slowly awakened. Taxis honked, streetcars rattled, neon signs faded into the daylight. The wallet rested on the table beside him, close enough that he could reach out and touch it whenever his nerves demanded reassurance. The girl slept curled on the sofa, exhausted from her confession the night before. For the first time in weeks, her body had loosened its grip on hunger and fear long enough to rest. Elvis watched her for a moment, struck by the fragility of her frame, and then turned away, ashamed at the thought of how different their worlds were. When she stirred awake, he was waiting with a tray of food, eggs, toast, and fruit. She hesitated, wary of charity, but he nudged it closer. "Eat. You'll need strength." His tone carried no condescension, only quiet insistence. As she ate, Elvis leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to help you," he said. "Whatever you need, money, a roof, new clothes, I'll see to it." Her fork paused midair. She shook her head. "No, I didn't bring that wallet back for money." He blinked, surprised. "Then what?" "I just wanted to do the right thing," she answered, eyes steady. "If I take anything now, it'll ruin that. Don't you see?" Her refusal unsettled him. He was used to people grasping at whatever he offered. Autographs, favors, cash. Yet here sat a girl with nothing, rejecting his wealth outright. The honesty in her voice struck deeper than any adoration he'd received from crowds. But the fragile quiet of their morning shattered by noon. Someone from the hotel staff, perhaps a maid, perhaps a clerk with loose lips, had spoken to the press. By evening, newspaper headlines blared across Memphis. Elvis Presley seen with homeless girl after show. Some papers were harsher, hinting at scandal, painting lurid scenarios that never happened. When Elvis's manager stormed into the suite waving the morning edition, his face was pale with fury. "This is a disaster," he barked. "We'll deny it. Say she's a fan who slipped past security. We can spin it in a day if you don't say a word." The girl shrank into the corner of the sofa, the paper's bold letters like daggers. She hadn't meant to drag his name into gossip. Her throat tightened with guilt. Elvis set his jaw. "No." The manager stared at him. "No? You don't understand, Elvis. This will stain your image. You've worked too hard to let a story like this define you." Elvis rose slowly, his height and presence filling the room. His voice was calm, but unyielding. "I won't lie about her." The argument went on, voices rising and falling like a storm battering the walls. The girl listened, heart pounding, as grown men debated whether her existence should be erased for the sake of public image. Every instinct told her to slip out the door, vanish, and spare him the trouble. Yet she couldn't move. That night, long after the shouting had faded and the suite had emptied again, Elvis sat at the piano in the corner of the room. The lamp above cast a soft circle of light over the keys. He began to play, not the hits the world expected, but a tune buried deep in his memory. A hymn his mother once sang to him, one he had avoided since her passing. His fingers moved hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty, pulling the melody out of the shadows. The girl sat on the carpet, knees hugged to her chest, listening. She didn't understand all the words, but she felt the ache in them, the weight of a son mourning his mother even now. When the last note faded, he rested his hands on the keys and bowed his head. "They want me to forget you were ever here," he murmured, almost to himself. "But I can't. You brought this back to me." His palm pressed against the wallet resting on the piano top. The girl didn't reply. She didn't need to. She understood. What she had returned to him was not leather and paper. It was the permission to still be human in a world that wanted him only as a legend. In that quiet, two figures sat side by side, one trying to protect his image, the other fighting to keep her dignity. Yet the music had drawn them together, binding them with something far stronger than fame or fear. The headlines outside screamed scandal, but in that dimly lit room, all that remained was truth. By the next morning, the newspapers had multiplied like wildfire. Every street corner vendor shouted headlines, waving front pages splashed with distorted photographs. "Elvis and Mystery Girl. Who is she?" "Scandal in Memphis Hotel?" "King of Rock caught in midnight drama." None of the stories were accurate. Reporters filled the gaps with imagination, painting the girl as anything from a runaway fan to a secret lover. The truth, that she had returned something sacred to him, was nowhere to be found. Crowds gathered outside the hotel. Some called out in support, chanting Elvis's name with loyalty, but others sneered, repeating the cruel words they had read. The sidewalk seethed with flashbulbs and raised voices. Placards appeared, half mocking, half demanding answers. Inside the suite, the girl pressed her forehead to the glass of the window, looking down at the mob. Her stomach knotted. She had never wanted attention. And now her presence was tearing at him from all directions. Turning away, she whispered, "I shouldn't have come. I've ruined everything." Elvis, seated at the edge of the bed, shook his head slowly. "You did the right thing. They're the ones twisting it." But she wasn't convinced. Every headline felt like a personal crime. Every rumor was another nail in his reputation, hammered by her simple act of honesty. The weight of guilt became unbearable. That night, while the hotel quieted and his entourage dozed in other rooms, she slipped out the service exit, with nothing but the clothes on her back. When Elvis discovered her absence the next morning, panic surged through him. His managers urged calm. "She'll disappear. Problem solved," they said. But he could not rest. Against their warnings, he disguised himself. Dark jacket, cap pulled low, tinted glasses. He had used such disguises before when he wanted to walk among the city unnoticed. Tonight, he wasn't seeking freedom. He was seeking her. The streets of Memphis, after midnight, were a world away from the glitter of his concerts. The sidewalks were cracked, lamps flickered dim, and stray dogs roamed alleys. Elvis moved with a sense of déjà vu. These streets resembled his childhood. The smell of fried grease from cheap diners, the hum of trains in the distance, the sight of weary men standing outside bars. For a moment, he was no longer the king. He was again the boy who grew up in poverty, barefoot on red clay, watching his mother stretch every coin. He checked bus stations, corners where the homeless gathered, even shelters where he had once volunteered quietly. No sign of her. His determination hardened. She had given him back a piece of his soul. He would not let the world drive her into oblivion. Finally, at the old railway station on the edge of town, he found her. She was curled on a wooden bench beneath a broken light fixture, knees drawn to her chest, arms around her legs. The building smelled of rust and rain-soaked wood, echoing with the distant groan of freight trains. In her lap lay the wallet. She hadn't let it go, even after leaving him. Elvis approached quietly, the scuff of his boots on concrete alerting her. She lifted her head, startled, then froze when she recognized him. Shame rushed over her face. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They'll follow you." "It'll only get worse." He sat beside her, ignoring the dust that clung to the bench. For a moment he said nothing, only looked at the wallet resting in her hands. "You still kept it," he murmured. She nodded faintly. "I thought, if I disappeared, you wouldn't have to carry the trouble I caused. But I couldn't throw this away. Not after knowing what it means to you." His throat tightened. In her defiance, in her guilt, in her stubborn refusal to let go of the one thing tying them together, he saw something achingly familiar. She reminded him of his own hunger as a boy, his own mother's fierce will to preserve dignity, even when they had nothing. He reached out, covering her hand with his. "You didn't ruin me," he said firmly. "You reminded me who I am." The station was silent, but for the dripping of rainwater through a leaky roof. Two figures sat on an old bench, one a star pursued by cameras, the other a girl invisible to the world. Yet in that moment, they met as equals, each carrying loneliness, each recognizing it in the other. Outside, the city's storm still raged, newspapers still spun their tales, and crowds still demanded explanations. But inside that forgotten station, the world's noise faded. Elvis had found her, and with her, a truth no scandal could erase. The following day, the frenzy reached its peak. Radios buzzed with speculation, newspapers shouted scandal from every corner, and television anchors spoke his name with the kind of relish reserved for downfall. The mystery girl had become an invention of gossip columns, painted alternately as a groupie, a thief, or a dangerous distraction. Elvis knew he could not hide behind silence. To say nothing was to let others define the truth. So when a trusted reporter he respected asked for an exclusive, Elvis agreed. The interview took place in a quiet lounge, far from the shouts outside. Cameras were absent. It was just a tape recorder on a table, a notepad, and 2 cups of coffee cooling untouched. The reporter leaned forward, expectant. Elvis, dressed plainly in a dark jacket, sat with his hands folded, the wallet visible on the table between them. "She didn't sneak in for fame," Elvis began, his voice steady. "She didn't ask for money. She gave this back to me." He touched the wallet gently, almost reverently. "Inside is the last letter my mama ever wrote. That's what she returned. Not cash, not valuables. Something no amount of money could buy." The reporter blinked, caught off guard. He had expected excuses, maybe a scripted denial. Instead, Elvis was giving him raw honesty. "I owe her more than I can ever repay," Elvis continued. "And if folks want to call that scandal, let them. But to me, it's grace." The article that followed wasn't what the managers feared. It was a revelation. Instead of painting Elvis as reckless, it showed him as a man of integrity, one who valued truth above image. For the first time, the girl's act was recognized for what it was: courage. Privately, Elvis set about helping her. He contacted a friend who ran a shelter, arranged a place for her to sleep where no one would pry. He spoke to a school principal he trusted, covering the fees so she could attend without worry. He insisted that none of it be publicized. "This isn't charity for headlines," he told his inner circle. "It's a debt of the heart." When he told her of these arrangements, she listened quietly, her hands clasped tight in her lap. At last she said, "I don't want handouts. I don't want pity." He frowned, puzzled. "Then what do you want?" She lifted her chin, surprising him with the strength in her eyes. "A chance to work, to prove I can stand on my own. I don't want my life to be a story of someone else saving me. I want to save myself." The words struck him harder than any applause he had heard on stage. All his life, people had begged for his money, his influence, his name. But here was someone who refused to be defined by his generosity. Her dignity, fragile yet unbroken, shone brighter than sequins under a spotlight. That evening, while the world outside still argued about gossip, Elvis sat alone with his thoughts. He realized that what she had given him was more than a wallet, or even a memory of his mother. She had given him reflection. She had reminded him of the man beneath the crown, the boy from Tupelo, who sang not for fame, but because music was breath and survival. He felt something inside settle, a balance he hadn't known he was missing. Fame had pulled him toward spectacle, but she had pulled him back to substance. In the quiet of his suite, he whispered words no one else heard. "You reminded me who I am." Months passed, and the noise of scandal gradually faded into memory. The papers found new stories to devour, and the crowds outside the hotel turned their eyes to other headlines. For Elvis, life returned to its relentless rhythm. Concerts in packed arenas, endless rehearsals, nights in hotel rooms that blurred together. Yet something within him had shifted. The girl, meanwhile, began to rebuild. The shelter gave her stability. The school gave her purpose. Her clothes were still second-hand, her shoes worn, but her eyes carried a different fire. She studied late into the night, determined not to waste the opportunity he had quietly arranged. She kept a small photograph of Elvis tucked into a notebook, not as a token of fame, but as a reminder of the words he had spoken. "You reminded me who I am." For Elvis, the wallet was once again a daily companion. Each time he touched it in his pocket before walking on stage, he felt more than the memory of his mother. He felt the echo of that night in Memphis when a stranger had handed it back with trembling hands and unknowingly given him back a piece of himself. One evening, months later, he stepped onto the stage of another Coliseum. The lights blazed, the audience screamed, and the orchestra struck the opening chords. Yet amid the thunder of applause, his thoughts were unusually still. He looked out at the vast sea of faces and, somewhere in the blur, saw a single figure. She was there. In the 12th row, dressed simply, hair pulled back, no sign that she belonged to this spectacle at all. She wasn't cheering wildly or waving signs. She simply watched, her eyes steady, a quiet presence in the storm. The concert roared on, hit after hit, voices in unison, the building itself trembling with sound. But when he reached the final song of the night, he chose one close to his heart, a hymn that spoke of endurance, of walking through darkness with faith. His voice carried through the arena, warm and resolute, filling every corner with a message of hope. As he sang, his gaze drifted again to her. For a brief moment, the thousands of fans disappeared. The lights, the cameras, the deafening roar, all of it faded. There was only her, the girl who had once sat shivering on a bench, in an abandoned house with his wallet pressed to her chest. Their eyes met across the distance. He gave the smallest of nods, a gesture invisible to the crowd, but unmistakable to her. Her lips parted in a faint smile, fragile, yet radiant, as if she understood the meaning hidden in the note he sustained. The audience erupted when the song ended, rising to their feet in thunderous ovation. To them it was another triumph, another performance from the king. But to the two who had shared that silent exchange, it was something else entirely. A private acknowledgement, a final chord tying together the unlikely crossing of their lives. Elvis bowed, thanked the crowd, and walked off stage. The noise behind him was deafening, but inside he carried only quiet. He knew the world would never tell this story, would never see the truth hidden behind headlines. And that was fine. Some truths were not meant for the world. They were meant for two people only. That night, when he returned to his suite and set the wallet on the table, he opened it once more. The letter lay there, fragile with age, edges curling. He read the words he had memorized long ago, his mother's hand urging him to keep faith. He smiled faintly and closed it again. This time not with the ache of loss, but with the peace of knowing he had honored her memory, not through fame or applause, but through a simple act of honesty returned to him by a stranger who had become more than that. In the end, it wasn't the roar of thousands that stayed with him. It was the silence of that nod across the arena, the reminder that the greatest acts in life are often quiet, unseen, and without spectacle. And so, while the world crowned him a legend, he carried within himself something more enduring. The knowledge that a lost wallet, a letter, and a girl from the streets had reminded him, when he most needed it, of the man he truly was.